government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back to Podcast by George. We're doing this on a Friday. It seems like we get to kind of have a cup of coffee and visit with our good friend Laura Belin from Bleeding Heartland is back on a Podcast by George. And I wanted to talk to her because of a couple of articles that she authored recently in Bleeding Heartland about the ballot and the voting process. And it's extremely critical. And it's because of this article that I cited with the interview that I just had on with Stephen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University. I'm going to read this, and it just scares the bejabbers out of me, honest to God. But anyway, I want to recite this article. This is from USA Today. The headline reads, "More than 1 million people could lose their vote on November 3rd. That's the best case scenario. Rejected ballots in the 2020 election battle between President Donald Trump and Joe Biden could become the post-election focus." Now, it says in a normal election year in any given state, hundreds or even thousands of absentee ballots get tossed for everything from late postmarks to open envelopes. But as we know all too well, the 2020 presidential election will not be normal. God, do you think? Absentee ballot rejections this November are projected to reach historic levels, rising widespread disenfranchisement of minority voters and the credibility of election results. A USA Today Columbia Journalism investigators and PBS series Frontline Investigation found. Now, what they're reporting is at least 1.03 million absentee ballots could be tossed if half of the nation votes by mail. Discarded votes jump to 1.55 million if 75% of the country votes absentee. My God, 1.5 million. And of course, everybody's voting absentee, or most people are anyway. I shouldn't say everybody. In the latter scenario, more than 185,000 votes could be lost in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. States considered key to capturing the White House. And of course, that's saying it mildly, I think, really.
Right.
Those are definitely key. Yeah. So, Laura, welcome back to a Podcast by George. And that must have seemed significant to you, and particularly here in the Hawkeye State, because you devoted a little series of articles just almost to the ballot itself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back, George. And I do try every election year to write about absentee voting because Iowans have been voting by absentee ballot in large numbers for quite a while now. Since the 2012 election, we've had more than 40% of the ballots have been cast by absentee. And for Democrats, it's even higher. In 2016, almost half the Democrats who voted early, either through mail or by voting early in person at a satellite location or in their county auditor's office. So the good news is for Iowa that we're used to a high volume of absentee voting. Our county auditors are used to processing the absentee voting. I'm a lot more worried about it in states that historically haven't had much absentee voting. You know, there are a lot of states where you used to need an excuse, like a valid excuse, or sometimes even have somebody else sign an affidavit for you to cast an absentee ballot. So there are going to be a lot of people who have never done this before, and county election officials who have never dealt with the volume of mail. And that is a real concern. Like especially in Pennsylvania, there was also a state Supreme Court ruling there that was pretty concerning. But I think that the most important thing for Iowans to remember when you're casting your ballot, you've got to follow all of the instructions. Fill in the ovals. Don't just do an X over the oval. Fill it in with black ink. If there's a secrecy envelope, seal it in the envelope and sign that affidavit envelope on the outside. That's one of the biggest reasons that absentee ballots get thrown out in Iowa, is because the voter forgets to sign the outside envelope. And I noticed, I'm in Polk County, I noticed when I hand delivered my ballot a week or so ago, they actually have a staffer sitting there. There's a desk kind of outside the office, so you don't have to go into the office, but looking at every ballot that people are hand delivering just to make sure that that affidavit envelope is signed. So if there's a problem with it, they can stop the voter right away and say, you need to fix this. And so hoping that that means that we will reduce the number of errors here. we have an enormous number of people voting by mail. Like as of this morning, I
Yeah.
checked the numbers before coming on here. More than 450,000 people, it's about 450,000 people have returned their absentee ballots already to the county auditors. That's almost equal to the entire early vote from the 2016 election. And we still have 2.5 weeks to go. So we're getting close to 800,000 Iowans who have requested an absentee ballot. It's
Wow.
just a massive number. But I think because of all the scare stories about the post office, people are getting their ballots back in earlier. They're not putting things off to mail, and many people like me are hand delivering the ballot. So I think that, I'm cautiously optimistic that we're not going to have a huge number of ballots thrown out in Iowa, but it is really important if you're voting by mail, especially if you've never done it before, read those instructions carefully.
I hope I did it right. My wife and I both voted honest to God. I don't want to join the ranks of 1 million to 1.5 million people that go through this after everything that we've been inundated with and all of the agitation about this election to not have my vote count. Well, let me pick up your article here because out of the Bleeding Heartland, and it reads, if you're among the hundreds of thousands of Iowans, as you mentioned, who received absentee ballots in the mail this week or voted early in person, you may have noticed that one party's candidates were listed first on all of the races for the federal and state offices. Perhaps the ballot order differed from your expectations. Okay, so I'm going to open this. Now, this is a ballot, a sample ballot from the state of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And
I know
you've seen this.
All the counties will have a different ballot.
Yeah.
So the county auditors can have fairly different designs.
Well, this one was out of Polk County,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was out of an Ankeny precinct, the sample was. But so I popped this thing open, and here at the top, obviously, you got to black it in ink. You got to fill in the box. You got to write in, if you're going to do a write-in name, you got to make sure that box is blacked and stuff like that. So I get on here, and I look at partisan offices. Well, that's kind of interesting, a way to refer to this. But anyway, president and vice president. So I look at this. Okay, here's Trump and Pence. And then Biden and Harris below that. And I think to myself, well, okay, I guess that makes sense because you got a sitting president, you got an incumbent for an office, so maybe they get first billing on this ballot because that's whose office is being sought. And I think, but wait a minute, where's the box where you can check a party? Used to be you can vote straight line. You can't do that anymore.
That's right. The Republicans eliminated that in 2017. There used to be at the top of every ballot, you could vote straight ticket for Democrat or Republican, and they took that away. It was actually gone for the 2018 election, and I was surprised to see that didn't have as much influence over the election as I expected. What I expected to happen in 2018 was a ton of people just voting for governor and maybe voting for Congress and leaving the rest of the ballot blank. But what I found when I was looking at the state legislative races and the county level races, that really most people who voted actually did fill out their whole ballot. So that was kind of encouraging. But yes, it's an issue, especially for people with disabilities. Some people who have trouble holding a pen, it's tedious. They now have to fill out a lot of ovals. They used to be that they could just fill out that one oval for the party they preferred. And so I didn't support that change when Republicans did that. But yeah, if anyone who didn't vote in the 2018 midterm election might be surprised to see that straight ticket option is gone now.
Well, here's the way that it struck me. I don't know what I know what the Republicans' justification for doing it was. I think they know there are more Democrats out there. There's an opportunity for more straight line voting on the Democratic side. They wanted to prevent that possibility so that they could win elections. At least that's what it seemed like to me. Okay, well, so I look at this, and so then if that's the case, why isn't it like bingo balls? Why do we still have the Republicans at the top and the Democrats following, the two major political parties, and all the lesser parties down below? If we're not going to have ranked order for these parties, if you can't vote straight line, I don't know, am I weird or what? I thought, well, okay, maybe it'll just be a toss-up and you'll have to sort it out and figure it as you go along. No, Republicans are at the top.
I think that the Republicans were trying to gain an advantage when they eliminated the straight ticket voting, but I don't actually think the data from past elections bore that out, that there were more Democrats using that option. But in any case, this question you raise about the ballot order of the candidates, that is related to a different law Republicans passed in 2019. And it didn't get a lot of notice at the time because there were more controversial things going on in that law. But it used to be that county auditors set the ballot in their own county. And usually what that meant is they put their own party's candidates first, because historically that political scientists believe that confers a small advantage for the candidates at the top. And it's really not the presidential race. You're not going to accidentally vote for Trump or Biden because they're listed first. Everyone knows who they are. But it's really more of an impact in those races farther down the ballot, when there might be a lot of voters who came to vote for president and then they see these people running for county offices or for state legislature and they have no idea who they are. So there could be a small advantage. And the Scott County auditor is a Democrat, and the person who was the architect of this bill was a Republican state senator from the Bettendorf area, Robbie Smith. And he hated that. So he put it in there that the auditors no longer have control over the ballot order. So it's
I didn't know
going
that.
to flip in every election. So like this, the counties are listed alphabetically and then they're each assigned a number. And so Polk County happens to be an odd number. It's the 77th county listed if you go alphabetically. So all the odd numbered counties this year have the Republican candidates at the top. And then the even numbered counties, it's the reverse. So in the 2022 election, you're going to look at your ballot in Polk County and you'll see all the Democratic candidates will be listed first. And it'll be the even numbered Iowa counties where all the Republicans are listed first. So this is, I don't think it's going to have that big an impact either way. In a very, very close race, especially for an office that not as many people might be familiar with the candidates, I could be impactful. But I mean, if you're voting for president if you're voting in the Senate race, you probably know who Joni Ernst and Teresa Greenfield are. You're not going to be fooled by who's first on the ballot.
Well, and again, my confusion also was this incumbent versus challenger thing, because I looked at it and I thought, okay, president and vice president, we got Trump, we got Biden challenging. So I'm going, okay, there's, by the way, Kanye didn't make the ballot. Kanye West is on there. So then I go down to senator. Okay, there's Joni Ernst. She's listed first. Teresa Greenfield. I go, okay, well, that's probably. And then I go down another section here. United States representative. Now, this is where it really left out at me, because David Young is listed first.
That's right.
And of course, he's a past incumbent, if you want to look at it that way. He's a guy that's ran before, and he's listed first here against Cindy Axtine. I thought, boy, isn't that's ironic? What a confusing factor that is.
This law, it has nothing to do with incumbency anymore. And one of the readers said, well, why didn't the legislature, why didn't they just make it alphabetical? But when you think about it, then, Cindy Axtine would be first every time. And maybe you like that because maybe you like Cindy Axtine, but what about, there could be a Republican named Anderson or something, and that Republican candidate could be first on every ballot in every election, and that wouldn't really be fair either. So I think that this solution, this alternating deal, I mean, it's not, to me, it's not that important. I wanted to mention it because I thought that readers might be confused about it. And it's not just affecting Polk County, it's also some other Democratic counties, Dubuque County, Lynn County, Blackhawk County, where it just so happens that all the Republican candidates are listed first. And I know that that's probably not what a lot of voters are expecting in those counties.
Well, you're going to have to do some investigation. And again, the ballot that we're looking at there, you see, is for Polk County, and it's for somebody living in Ankeny 11, it looks like. And I mean, you've got to do your background. You got to do some work. There's a lot of people to vote for here. You're not going to be able to vote straight line. You don't have to vote for people, but if you're going to vote for somebody, you need to do a little investigation. Soil and Water Conservation District Commissioner, my wife looked into that. My God, the work that she does on this stuff. Yeah. And I take her lead. I mean, I could have that benefit. The County Agricultural Extension Council, the name that jumped out at me there, Deborah Brewer Kotler. God love her. That would be the wife of my dearly departed friend and former broadcaster Larry Kotler.
Oh.
She's running for that office. I didn't even know it. I mean, I just saw it when I looked at it. But that's who that is, folks.
I noticed on my website that a lot of people, when the ballots went out, a lot of people are Googling the names, because I see people landing on things I've written about some of the candidates or some of the judges. Especially I was seeing, because there's not a lot of information on a lot of these people running for office. So if you Google their names, it might be difficult to find news coverage.
Well, let's talk about these judges, because that's critical. I mean, that's really important. And I got to admit, now, and you mentioned this in your article, there's a couple of camps on this thing. There are people that vote against all of them. Or they don't vote at all, or and I've done that before, Laura. I mean, I've always been
Voted
kind of
against all the
sour,
judges.
yeah, about the judicial system. I went through a divorce. I didn't like any of the judges. I didn't care if it was from the Supreme Court down to the county judge. Man, I voted them all out of there. I mean, get out of there. But I liked your analysis on this, and in particular, the Supreme Court justices. Give us your take on that.
Well, it's typically in an Iowa. Iowa judges are not elected directly by the people, but they're up for retention every 6 years or every 8 years if they're on the Supreme Court, which means Iowans get to vote yes or no on whether they should stay in office. And typically, about 25 to 30% of the voters will just vote no on all the judges at every time. But most people, if they vote at all, will vote yes on all the judges, unless they have a specific reason. And that's always been my default position, is that generally speaking, let's keep politics out of the judiciary. And I'll usually, unless I really hear that someone is incompetent, I'll vote yes on all the judges. And I voted yes on the judges Branstad appointed before to the Iowa Supreme Court and Reynolds appointed. So I really don't have an issue with that. There are people who feel that, I mean, politics, their political views enter their decision on the judges. So, for instance, the collective bargaining decision was a big one. There was a 4-3 Iowa Supreme Court ruling upholding that terrible 2017 law that stripped collective bargaining rights from almost all the public sector workers. And those 4 justices that are on the ballot this year, they are the ones who voted to uphold that law. And so I know a lot of people who normally don't vote against judges, and they've just voted against them on that basis. For me, there has to be something really extraordinary. Either they're incompetent or they're unethical, and all of these judges are incompetent. So are competent. It's not that they're incompetent, but they, in my view, 3 of them engaged in some really unethical behavior last year when Republicans were trying to change judicial selection. And I explained that in more detail in the post. But the bottom line was they didn't disclose Waterman, Mansfield, and McDonald. They were very, very likely involved in lobbying Iowa House Republicans to vote for this bill that affected the judiciary. And then they didn't disclose the communications they had with the members of the legislature or staff in the governor's office or the governor herself about the bill. And the bill was challenged in a lawsuit. It's now it was tossed out, basically. It was never heard on the merits. But the plaintiffs challenging that law, they filed a motion for recusal in the Iowa Supreme Court, saying they asked any judge who had engaged in advocacy for that law to recuse themselves. And those justices were obligated to reveal any relevant conversations they had about the bill. They should have revealed those, and they didn't. They all declined to recuse themselves, and they declined to specify. And that was just a deal breaker for me. I mean, I believe,
yeah,
I believe from my own reporting that they did have those conversations, but whether they did or not, they had an ethical obligation under the Iowa Code of Judicial Conduct. They needed to disclose what conversations they happened. And if they decide that they don't think they should recuse, that's their right, but only after disclosure. Now, I will say the best counter argument to my argument is that Kim Reynolds holds the keys right now, guys. So if any judges who are tossed out this year, she's going to appoint conservative judges to replace them. So don't anyone vote against judges on the illusion that if you vote out these conservative judges, we're going to get some liberal judges, because that's not happening until we get a new governor who can put new people on Iowa's Judicial Nominating Commission. So that's the bad news. So, and I know people who said, I agree with you, but I'm afraid that Kim Reynolds would appoint people worse. And so I voted yes on all the judges. And I think that's a reasonable position.
Well, I kind of look at it as the difference between being conservative and liberal as far as the judge is concerned, and then lying, cheating, and stealing, as I call it, suffering from LCS, the great obfuscation. And if they're not disclosing those conversations, if they're legally obligated to do that, that's what they're supposed to be all about. So I'm kind of with you on this. I mean, honest to God. And you can't just look at it and say, well, that kind of stuff always goes on. They've been doing that for years. No, somebody like your dad, for instance, in his time, they never heard of this kind of political activity by a Supreme Court justice.
I guarantee you it never. I talked to many people when I was working on this story in 2019. This was a story I was chasing for months, literally. And I only was able to write about it after the Chief Justice published. He put a lot of stuff out there on the open record, but I talked to a lot of people off the record, people who were involved with legislative happenings or lobbyists. And the Chief Justice, generally speaking, he communicates with members of the legislature about judicial matters. He's the only judge who communicates with members of the legislature. Other justices on the Supreme Court, this was completely unheard of among staff, lobbyists, legislators, former legislators. No one could think of a time when anyone else on the Supreme Court ever talked to legislators about bills, let alone encourage them to vote for a bill. I mean, it's just completely unheard of. And so it's not just like, oh yeah, well, this happens all the time and we just found out about it this year. And I even I retained Mansfield and Waterman. They were on the ballot in 2012 after Branstad appointed them. I knew they were conservative. I knew I wasn't going to like their rulings. I don't like a lot of their rulings. And I had every expectation that I would vote to retain them again because they are competent. But I just couldn't cross that bridge.
Well, everybody's talking Supreme Court now because of the U.S. Supreme Court. They have lifetime appointments there. Chuck Grassley is flopped. I don't know what you want to call it. And again, at one point of clarification here, information, if you can. So the Iowa Supreme Court justices, they get appointed when they get voted out of office. Are their appointments lifetime otherwise, or how does that work as far as tenure?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have lifetime tenure. Judges have a mandatory retirement age of 72. So they're appointed. The year after they're appointed, they are on the ballot for retention. That's for the Supreme Court, that's an 8-year term. For all judges at lower courts, so the Court of Appeals or the district courts, they're on the ballot every 6 years up for retention. And so generally speaking, voters retain. I mean, it's only happened a handful of times in 60 years that judges have not been retained. So in 2010, of course, the conservatives ran a big campaign against 3 of the justices on the ballot because of the marriage equality ruling, and they were tossed out. But that is very unusual. So typically, once they're appointed, they're not on there for life, but they're on there until they want to retire or they're 72 years old.
Well, it's very interesting to me because on one hand, you look at it and say, well, what are we voting for these people at all? Why is this political? How does it come down to being on the ballot where you're voting Republican and Democrat for something? But then again, it avoids you having Supreme Court justices appointed by a nut like we have in the White House right now, or some people would look at the governor's mansion the same way in the state of Iowa. And then,
Iowa actually did elect judges for most of our history. We changed the system in 1962 because it was hard to get competent people to stand for office. And you don't want judges raising campaign funds. That happens in a lot of other states where a lawyer gets a case, lands in the courtroom, and then the lawyer goes and makes a campaign contribution to the judge. And that's just wrong. So they changed. Actually, I wrote about this last year. Chuck Grassley, was his first year in the legislature, 1959. They passed a judicial reform. It was a constitutional amendment. So they passed it in 59. The legislature had to pass it again in 61, and Iowans approved it on the ballot in 62. So we no longer directly elect judges. And I really like our judicial system as a whole. I think it's better not to have as much politics in the judiciary like you have in Wisconsin and some other states. Pennsylvania is another one, North Carolina. I mean, these Supreme Court elections are kind of a nightmare, and special interest money does end up playing too much of a role.
Well, I like the one basic in particular that the state of Iowa has that you just mentioned, the fact that 72 and they're out. I mean, I wish that was the way with the Supreme Court justices. Yeah. I don't know where the lifetime appointment thing came about. Maybe that was in 1775 when the average life of an American maybe was 60, you know, but now we're living to be 80, 90, 100 years old, and I think it's a good idea to have that tenure end at the age of 72. Well, Laura, again, I appreciate your being patient and answering my questions.
Can I raise one more thing?
Yeah, please. I wanted to. Yeah.
There's on the backside of the ballot in Iowa, there's a question about a constitutional convention.
Yes.
A lot of people have asked me about that. So it's not related. You may have heard the Koch brothers, the Koch network, conservative network, is trying to fund what's called the Article 5 movement. They're trying to get a constitutional convention called that would, if enough states pass these Article 5 resolutions, they could rewrite the entire U.S. Constitution. This is not related to that at all. This is something that's part of Iowa's Constitution. It's been there since 1870. Every 10 years on the ballot in the year ending in 0, Iowans have an opportunity to vote. Do we want to call a constitutional convention or not? And I always encourage people to vote no. It usually gets defeated by an overwhelming margin because there's no process. If it passed, the legislature would have to choose how the constitutional convention delegates would be selected. We have no idea how that would work. We have no idea what they could throw out that would be, things that we don't want thrown out. So, and I worry that special interest money would control the process. So a lot of people have said, why is that there? No one petitioned to put that there. It's just automatically on the ballot. And it's just, I would encourage everyone to vote no on that. But I also wouldn't worry too much about it because it's not likely to pass. No one's pushing for it.
That's great. To me, I voted against it. I don't want to see the nuts come out of the woodwork. That's what I thought when I looked at it, and that's what I thought would happen. We'd have militias marching on the State House to do constitutional conventions or some craziness. So, all right, Laura, that's great. Again, we're out of time. I just can't believe how quickly it goes by. There's so many things that are so important, and you're so informed. And anything in closing now that you mentioned that? Is there anything else that I didn't ask about that you'd like to undergo?
I don't think so. I'm just, I've got more things in the works before the election, but we can talk about those later.
Well, I'll restate something. Folks, go to Bleeding Heartland on the web. Become a patron. Sign up. Get each and every posting by Laura and a long list of contributors. It's a community blog there. And I mean, the people that write on that are excellent, and you can learn a lot about this. Everything that we talked about today, you can find on Bleeding Heartland with Laura Belin. Thanks again, Laura.
Thanks so much, George.
That's going to wrap it up. If you like Podcast by George now, you can find us at podcastbygeorge.com. You just pick a badge there, a little icon that you'd like to subscribe to, and you can find us on your favorite platform, iTunes, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, YouTube, Facebook, any number of places. You can sign up and listen to Podcast by George, or you can watch it if you're video enabled, because we're on YouTube and Facebook and other places where the video podcasts appear. That's going to wrap it up. That's going to do it. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.